All right, why don't we go ahead and get going for the evening. First, I just want to welcome all of you and thank you all for taking time this evening to join us for our Ramsey County and City of St. Paul joint public meeting to hear about the draft analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. I will quickly introduce myself. My name is Kirsten Birch, and I am the Fair Housing Coordinator for the City of St. Paul. I'll also invite my colleague from Ramsey County to introduce herself as well.
Hi, I'm Mary Lou Egan, and I'm with Ramsey County Community and Economic Development, and the camera on my laptop doesn't work, so hello.
And then I'll welcome our consultant from the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law to introduce herself briefly before we get started.
Hi, my name is Sarah Carthen Watson. I'm Associate Counsel on the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law in the Fair Housing and Community Development Project.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Born and raised in Ramsey County, so happy to be home.
Thanks so much. And so before we jump into Sarah presenting, just let you know that Mary Lou and I will both be monitoring the chat today and admitting folks into the meeting. So feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, but just want to give a little bit of context for today and some housekeeping before we get started. Both the City of St. Paul and Ramsey County are members of the Fair Housing Implementation Council, and it's often referred to as the FIC. But the FIC is a collaboration of multiple jurisdictions in the region who work together to coordinate efforts related to kind of our collective obligations to affirmatively further fair housing throughout the Twin Cities metro housing market area. Funding and participating members of the FIC include the cities of Bloomington, Eden Prairie, Minneapolis, Plymouth, St. Paul, and Woodbury. It includes the counties of Anoka, Hennepin, and Ramsey, and then the community development agencies of Carver County, Dakota County, Scott County, and Washington County. And then we also have the Metropolitan Council is a member of the FIC as well. I will let our consultant kind of give you an overview of what the regional analysis of impediments to fair housing choice is as she moves into her presentation. And then, today will be an opportunity for you to hear about those findings and provide any comments or feedback on what is in the current version of the draft report or ask any questions. For a few housekeeping notes, we will ask everyone to please keep your microphone muted unless you are speaking, and also to turn your video off if possible. That way we'll be able to see both our speaker and the presentation this evening. Again, Sarah will go over the draft in sections, and there will be opportunities for you to ask questions either in between kind of the pieces that she's presenting or at the end. If it's easy for you, you can place questions that you have in the chat, and Mary Lou and I can monitor the chat and make sure we get those questions asked during today's meeting. If you need to ask your question verbally or would prefer to do that, you can also raise your hand via Microsoft Teams or just send a quick message in the chat to let us know that you have a question, and then we can call on you to ask your question. I want to let you all know that the presentation is also being recorded, and once we complete this, we will work to get this presentation shared as well, so that those who weren't able to attend will have an opportunity to review this meeting. And then just remind you that the public comment period on the draft analysis is open until October 18th. So you can provide comments to the city. Both Ramsey County and the City of St. Paul have this information on our landing pages, and I can throw that link in the chat as well. But you can provide written comments to us that we will then, as a FIC, as a collaboration, take in all of the comments and feedback that we received on the draft and determine if there are necessary adjustments to make to this report before finalizing it. If there aren't any questions going forward, I'll go ahead and turn my camera off and put myself on mute and then invite Sarah to begin the presentation.
Great, thanks, Kristen. Let me just make sure I can remember how to share my screen again before I get started. And of course, now it doesn't want to work. Let's see. Wait 1 second. Let's see if it will come up. Okay. There we go. Sorry about that. Kirsten, can you all see that?
I can see it, yes.
I
Okay.
can see it. Yep, thanks.
You can still see me?
Yep, I can see
Well,
you.
yeah, down in the corner, I can see you. Yeah.
Perfect. We're all good. Okay, welcome everyone. As I mentioned, my name is Sarah Carthen Watson. I'm an attorney with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. We are a national legal nonprofit that was founded in 1963 by President John F. Kennedy with the goal of mobilizing the private bar and its resources to do civil rights work. Primarily, we do litigation, but the Fair Housing Project in particular has a wider range of activities. In addition to litigation, such as challenging discriminatory housing practices across the country, we also do a significant amount of national and local policy work, including advocacy for tenant protections or drafting legislation on behalf of local tenant organizing groups, things like that. And we provide a significant amount of legal support to tenant organizing groups across the country as well. But we also do a significant amount of consulting work around the AFFH rule, which I'll explain in a little bit. But that's how we got here. So we've been doing analysis of impediments to fair housing choice or assessments of fair housing, depending on when you're talking about. For time now, and we've done anything from a regional AI like this that includes the 7 metro counties. We've done ones as small as individual jurisdictions, such as a single city, and we've also done ones as large as a state. So we just wrapped the statewide analysis of impediments to fair housing choice for the state of Delaware. So we're very, very, very experienced in these types of analyses. And so, as I mentioned, I'm from the Twin Cities area, and I'm really excited to have done this work. And it's been great working with Kirsten and Mary Lou for the last year on the Twin Cities regional analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. And so I'll be going through our process. I'll be explaining exactly what the AI is, what type of analysis we did. And then the bulk of this presentation is really the goals and strategy section, which is at the end. And this is a summary of the analysis. The draft is very long, but there's also an executive summary that you can read. But I really encourage you, there's a lot of really good data in there, and it's all broken down by jurisdiction. So there's a section for Ramsey County, or there's an analysis for Ramsey County in each section and an analysis for St. Paul in each section. So you can kind of pick through and look through the jurisdictions that you're interested in, but there's a lot of data there. There's a lot of analysis there. And we also conducted extensive community engagement. And so all of those things combine to produce the recommendations that will be at the end. And I really want this to be a discussion. I want to hear your thoughts. This draft is just a draft. It is not finalized yet. And even if we were not required to incorporate all public comment, we would do it anyway because we think it's important. And so I'm going to try and get through this presentation as quickly as possible. I'll stop in between in case anybody has any questions, but I want to make sure to leave time at the end so that we can hear from you all. So we already did introductions. So just briefly, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with different types of protections, but the reason that we are here is because the Fair Housing Act not only prohibits discrimination with regards to real estate transactions on the basis of these characteristics. So you've got race, color, religion, sex, familial status, national origin, and disability. And that includes everything from selling homes to renting homes, financing, so that would be loans and things like that. You can't discriminate on the basis of those protected classes. But what Housing Act also includes a mandate to HUD, and that mandate requires that HUD administer all of its programs and activities, which includes grant funds, in a manner that affirmatively furthers the policies of the Act. And we call this the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Rule. And this rule requires that HUD do more than just not discriminate, but you have to use this grant programs to assist in ending discrimination and segregation. And that mandate extends to anybody who receives certain types of HUD funds. So the jurisdictions that Kirsten mentioned as part of the FIC all receive certain types of HUD funds that require them to complete this analysis. That analysis requires them to examine barriers to housing within their jurisdiction, and take tangible steps and report to HUD what tangible steps they plan to take to address those barriers. I also want to note that Minnesota is extremely fortunate to have additional protections. So the Fair Housing Act is a national policy, a national law that protects everyone, but the Minnesota Human Rights Act actually provides additional protections, not just in housing, but also in employment, public accommodations, education, et cetera. And so in addition to some of the same categories that you see on the Fair Housing Act side, there are also additional protections such as marital status, age, sexual orientation, and gender identity. So Minnesota is actually ahead of the curve in terms of providing protections for more groups of people. So as I mentioned, the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule is really, it's a planning rule. It's essentially designed to have the jurisdictions take a step back and say, okay, we have these HUD funds. What are we going to do with them? What are we going to do with this money in a way that helps provide additional housing opportunities to people, that helps reduce discrimination and segregation in our jurisdiction, et cetera. So it's designed to kind of connect fair housing planning with other types of planning that the jurisdictions might do on a regular basis, such as the consolidated plan, annual action plans, and plans that public housing authorities have to put together. So it's designed to fit into this framework to provide a comprehensive way to determine locally focused fair housing goals and priorities and set up a framework for taking steps to affirmatively further fair housing. So that's what this document is. It's a lot of analysis. It goes through and looks at a whole host of categories of information and then whittles it down based on that data as well as the community engagement piece to determine these recommendations. So just to provide a quick overview of our process, the beginning was a lot of research. HUD has an extensive amount of data on every single jurisdiction, period, but also especially the ones that receive certain types of HUD funds. So in addition to data on, race and ethnicity, for example, we can also look at where families of different sizes are located. We can look at maps to determine who has access to proficient schools, who has more access to job market participation, who has more access to low-cost public transportation. And we can use those maps and use that data and overlay the data with each other to try and determine specific patterns. So is there a certain policy that might affect the reasoning for this type of pattern? Where are groups of people located? And is that connected to where opportunities are? Are certain groups of people further away from proficient schools, further away from the job centers? Things like that. And those types of that type of analysis can help us provide policy recommendations that will address disparities in housing and beyond in the region. In addition to the HUD data, which is very specific, very good data, it's also kind of black and white in the sense that HUD is reviewing the same data for every single jurisdiction. What kind of colors in that black and white is the local data and policy analysis that we've done. And so thanks to the FIC, the different FIC jurisdictions, we were able to, and particularly the Metropolitan Council, we were able to look at a lot of local data, a lot of local policies, and be able to tighten up that analysis to make sure it's as specific as possible to the Twin Cities region. Another way that we color in the black and white of the numbers and the maps is community engagement. And so we not only conducted a series of focus groups, but also community meetings and also these public hearings, because at our core, we are fair housing attorneys. We are civil rights attorneys doing this work. And we believe that policies that are directed at helping folks should actually include the voices of the people that are being affected. And so I spent the last year flying back and forth between DC and Minnesota. My mom was very happy about that. Doing a series of meetings with different groups across the Twin Cities region to hear what the issues are, what housing issues exist, what barriers to housing exist, what are different service providers seeing, how are people engaging with services, mental health services, public housing authorities, all of that. And all of that informed the draft that is posted and available for public comment. And so from all of that information, we develop these recommendations and goals. And so, like I said, we really want this draft to be informed by people who are impacted by these policies. And so when we get to the recommendation and goals section, I welcome any and all comment. Submit your written comments, provide comments now, but we really want to hear from you all. This is just a quick example of the HUD data that we have access to. So if you look on the left of your screen, this is a racial and ethnicity dot density map. So each dot is a different color, which represents a different race, and they are grouped according to population in the region. So this is a map for the region, but there's also a map just like this for every single jurisdiction in the FIC. And then we can also overlay that with different maps. So we can have a map that shows us where the most jobs are located or who has access to the most jobs. And we can overlay that with race and ethnicity to determine patterns. Same thing with transportation, same thing with education. So we do this kind of comparative analysis to determine patterns and develop our recommendations. And we also have a significant number of charts throughout this document. I think there are maybe 300 pages of maps and charts throughout this thing. But they're all really important because especially looking at the chart on your right, we not only look at things as they are right now, but we also go all the way back to 1990, and we look at different trends every couple decades to see what's going on and what might have changed. So in addition to the actual data, we're looking at policy changes. If a new policy is passed, is that impacting demographic trends? Is that impacting people's access to certain services and how things are changing over time? So this is just a snapshot to give you a sense of the overwhelming amount of data that was considered in putting this thing together. This list is also available in both the executive summary as well as in the actual draft itself. But this is a list of everybody that we met with during the community engagement process over the last year. I know it's impossible to meet with everyone or to talk to everyone, but we're really proud. The FIC and I both worked extensively to make sure that this was a representative sample of groups that are working on housing issues or groups that are experiencing housing issues throughout the region. And we really, really worked hard to develop that list and reach out to people and meet with as many people as possible. So I'll give you all a second just to look over this list and see how many people contributed to this thing, and really hope that it feels like it was helped drafted by the community. All right. Okay, so we're at the section where we'll be going through the goals and strategies. And in the interest of time, so I'm not just talking at you all for another 30 minutes, each slide has a goal. And so I'll give a little background on the goal and why we chose that goal, what we heard from different folks about why that goal was important. And then below it, you'll see a set of strategies that we have determined that we think that jurisdictions in the FIC can take to address that goal or to reach that goal. One thing to note, based on how this is the fifth public hearing that we've done so far, is this is a regional analysis. And so it's impossible to have every single jurisdiction. Some goals are going to apply to every jurisdiction. Some goals might apply to 2 or 3 jurisdictions. Some goals might apply to no jurisdictions. But that's kind of the plus or minus of doing a regional analysis, is that we tried to consolidate everything that we heard from across 7 different counties and develop a set of goals and strategies that would really be useful to the different jurisdictions. So keep that in mind as we go through, and I'll stop after each goal in case people have questions, because it can be kind of hard to remember questions all the way to the end. So the first goal, sorry, I'm trying to move this box so I can see. Okay, there we go. The first goal is to increase the supply of affordable housing, particularly in high opportunity areas. So the first thing that we heard when we started meeting with people for this analysis is that there simply is not enough affordable housing. And the affordable housing that exists, it may not be in areas that people want to live. It's kind of concentrated in certain areas. And so we provided these goals as a way to try and increase that supply of affordable housing throughout the region, particularly in areas that might provide folks with more opportunity. So I'll give you all a second to read these goals, and then Kirsten and Mary Lou, can you all let me know if anybody has a question, or call on someone if they have questions?
Sure, absolutely.
Great. All right, if there are no questions, I'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. So the other thing that we heard is not only is there simply not enough affordable housing in the region, the existing stock of affordable rental housing is in pretty bad shape. And that includes both, as you can see here, manufactured home communities throughout the region, but also single-family rental homes, multifamily affordable rental housing was in bad shape. And what is problematic about that is that affordable housing that's in bad shape is really attractive to investors who want to come in and flip it. And so we heard a lot about folks saying, well, our landlord hasn't been fixing anything for years, and all of a sudden this outside investor came in, bought up our property, and we have to leave. And we heard several stories about that, particularly with all the new development that's going on in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And so these goals are really designed to help preserve the existing stock of affordable rental housing so that people not only aren't subjected to displacement, but that they have homes that are, safe and also affordable.
Not seeing any hands raised or any questions in the chat.
Okay. And I can send this PowerPoint around to Kirsten and Mary Lou so that it can be posted along with the draft if that's helpful afterwards too. I know there's a lot of text there. So goal 3, I think, is really interesting, particularly for,
Sarah.
Yes.
Sorry, there's one question that just popped up.
Great.
It's what's the legal basis of restrictions on flipping?
Well, so in terms of the legal basis, I'm not sure I understand the question. Is the question whether or not it's legal to provide restrictions? I'll assume that's the question. So obviously a city can't say, okay, we're not allowing any type of development, but restrictions are not designed to kind of constrict the ability of developers to actually build affordable rental housing. But as I mentioned earlier, we did hear a lot of stories of these outside investors coming in, flipping rental housing, evicting all of the people or displacing all of the tenants, and then building the new housing that they're building in the same place is not affordable or not at a deep enough level of affordability or not the same number of units. So really when developers apply for permits, when they basically apply for permission from the city to develop or flip a rental property, we suggest that those jurisdictions require that any units that are built afterwards remain at affordable, deeper levels of affordability. And that also the tenants that are displaced have a right of return so that they're not, displaced and can't have the benefit of the renovation that's been done. And also if there are tenants that cannot be relocated or that can't go back into the previous unit or don't want to go back into the previous unit, that they have access to relocation services so they're not just displaced without any type of help. So we're not saying no more affordable housing development, no more flipping by outside investors, but making sure that that flipping is not having a disproportionate impact on the people that live there.
And there was one more question on this slide. It says, what efforts are being taken to engage for-profit developers in this process? I feel like a lot of times they get let off the hook, which is evident by the abundance of market rate housing being built in the metro area.
Yeah, so I think the restrictions that that jurisdictions can place on developers can be really helpful in that. And I agree that for-profit developers often are not held to, maybe not held to the same standard, but I think that jurisdictions have the power to do that. Like a large for-profit developer can't just come in and do whatever it wants in the city of St. Paul or in Ramsey County. It has to get some type of permission. And I think that built into that application process, cities can say, this is a priority for us. This is what we want. We want to make sure that our folks have access to affordable housing. We want to make sure that whatever building you're putting up has a certain number of units that will be affordable to people who need housing. That tenants who are displaced are going to have access to relocation services. That can be something that can be implemented whether the developer is for profit or not.
Great, thanks. I don't see any additional questions here.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so supporting homeownership for households of color. As I was saying, I think this is really important because Minnesota has one of the highest homeownership rates in the country, and a lot of people own their homes. Even as a young person, I'm seeing a lot of my friends buying homes here in the Twin Cities at this point in our lives. But we know that that is not consistent across different races or different groups of people. And homeownership for households of color is harder to attain and it's harder to maintain based on a variety of issues. So we found that there was significant lending discrimination that was occurring. We found that down payment assistance programs don't necessarily cover all the costs, that there can be credit issues, particularly for folks who have immigrated here and don't have a credit history to try and buy a home. It can be very difficult. And so we wanted to craft some strategies that would help households of color specifically attain the goal of home ownership. And so these strategies are designed for that.
Not seeing any hands raised or questions in response to this goal.
So goal 4 is to prevent displacement of Black and Brown, low income and moderate income residents. And this goal is really important to us because community engagement across the board reported displacement. We heard that a lot of new development is happening, and not only are entire buildings being bought up and renovated with tenants being displaced, but also new developments that didn't displace tenants necessarily in the actual building itself, but are displacing entire communities in certain places due to new development. For example, additional transit expansion has displaced some folks in St. Paul. We've heard a lot of it in Minneapolis. And so we wanted to craft some strategies that would help prevent that displacement, not to stall development, not to say that new development or renovation or a new investment in certain neighborhoods is not great. It absolutely is. But we want to find a way to do that that doesn't displace people and completely change the entire fabric of a neighborhood when folks have been living there, for years and years and years. We want to make sure that we're achieving that balance of development without displacement. So these are strategies that are designed to help with preventing displacement, particularly of Black and Brown communities.
I want to call on Jay Wilkinson. I see you have a hand up.
Right.
If you're speaking, I think you're still on mute.
Okay, I'm sorry, I typed my comment in on the chat. I just say that on the home ownership piece, that the particular proposal which suggests that adding efforts to assist people on public assistance to become homeowners is such an expensive proposition that it's much better to use the limited resources in the rental field. I've seen presentations which show that it costs, hundreds of thousands of dollars to assist a single family to get into home ownership, which is great for that family, but for other households that don't get those hundreds of thousands of dollars, they remain really in dire straits. So that's a comment on that. That's all. Thanks.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Any other comments or questions on, I guess, the homeownership slide or this one?
I'm not seeing any other hands up or any questions in the chat or comments.
All right, so goal 5 is to increase community integration for persons with disabilities. Those with disabilities can be on fixed incomes, can be relying on different types of housing vouchers, and may need additional live-in services or a care aid. And that all of those things can combine to isolate folks or relegate them to certain areas. And so these goals, after meeting with the Minnesota State Council on Disability and a few other disability groups, disability rights groups, we developed these types of goals to help increase community integration. Particularly, I think the exploration of creation of more affordable transportation options is really important. We heard a lot about limited transportation, and that can affect where you can live, especially if you are trying to work or you need somebody who is coming into your home to make sure they can get to you